I'm Enrique Tomás. I'm from the Interface Cultures Department in the University of Arts in Linz. And usually my field of study is the, understanding how we can interpret instruments, digital or analog, as scores. But in this talk, I was actually, the whole summer sketching a little bit my presentation or what could I talk. And then I thought that it was maybe interesting mostly talking about representation. So what I will suggest during this talk is that maybe there's a possibility for writing music without the need of representation as we use it right now, and also where the musical work would be enacted directly by our body, so not as a cognitive process, but more as a process of embodiment with some kind of environment. So also one of the questions that Thor asked us is how does notation evolves with technology, with our new philosophies, etc. I needed some kind of point of departure. So I thought of notations 50 years ago almost, and how does it changes into something like this, that is notations 21, 10 years ago. Mostly, of course, we have a lot of advances in technological representation, in how we understand performative situations, how the instrumentality has evolved. But we are still really prisoners of representation. We still see that basically everything is on a paper. The composer wants to represent some kind of music or musical aim, and then uses notation as a kind of intermediary to talk with the interpreter. And is this something actually that, I know, was frustrating me a little bit, how in these 40 years we have not really developed a new way of seeing representation within music. In art, for example, that is the field that I work with, it was really clear in the 70s and 80s, mostly because of postmodernism, the idea that representation was in a big crisis. There are two main issues with representation. One would be epistemological, how is that? Yeah. That would be how our signs, how our symbols, how the ideas that we have correlate with the real world. Is what we think what happens really in the world, or our words really correlate with them. And the second that would be more ontological is that, now that we are really immersed in the use of many virtual artifacts, like, for example, television, but many others now with internet and digital technologies, how through their representation, or how our life through this virtual representation really correlates with the world. So it's really what we see on TV, is real or not, no? So in arts, that was really a big topic, no? And it was actually, used by many artists for creating nice pieces, and also by many philosophers, this crisis of representation for explaining that maybe there's a hope, or maybe it's a possibility of not using representation, but other strategies for communicating our ideas. I'm bringing here Karen Barat when she says, it seems that notation problems is its own captivity within language. So even we see in these notation books that still we need to use representation because we are so much used to that we cannot imagine notating without the use of some type of linguistic representation. Even, notation and representation became a kind of philosophy. It's like, for example, here in the background, I'm showing Peirce on the algebra of logic, this when he coins the concept of philosophy of notation. And the idea evolves and evolves, and it makes really a big philosophical problem right now, no? It's also interesting that Peirce, in the 1820, talks about notation and starts his book talking about the nerves. So in a distributed, way in our body, in an embodied way. So really, he's not talking about a cognitive only process, but more as an embodied process. So what is the the alternative? Here I'm bringing what is called the three phases of learning. or the three types of intelligence that human we have in theory. That is that at the beginning we are quite inactive, so we basically know how to grasp and check. Then at some age we know that certain objects or images have some meaning. For example, we know that I don't know, some particular thing relates to that, and then we catch it. And then when we learn how to write and read, we become symbolic machines. Humans, we are mostly symbolic. It's really interesting that the evolution of technology and computers comes from the other directions and from the other sense. So at the beginning, we were quite symbolic and we were using teletypes and everything was dialogue. Then we create the graphical user interface and manipulating icons. And finally, we are now trying to build something inactive from computers. This slide I will use later, so just remember it. But of course, there are many new approaches to this thing of embodiment and the use of the body. One of the most important in the last decades was this theory of enaction, where actually we understand that our body does not use really representations when it's in an interaction with an environment. It's just a coordination of movements, mostly a loop of action and perception through our sensory motor skills. So our cognition is there, of course, but is mostly what we are doing is interacting with the world with our body. Another approach is the approach of Albanoi, and of course he also goes even further with the new neuroscience findings and says that the data or stream of data that we get from our senses at all creates any representation in our mind. So it's only the brain which is coordinating our movements and our activities. So instead of constructing a representation, the brain coordinates. That's another approach. And he comes with this colophon: activate the body first, let the mind observe its result. What happens? This is actually something that some choreographers are doing. For example, I don't know if you know the case of the choreographic objects by William Forsythe, where he puts an environment with the specific affordances, and then you are not really using your cognitive processes or your cognitive things for interacting with the space or creating a choreography. You are just, letting your body think without, really controlling it. Also, I thought it was interesting bringing this quote by Stéphane Mallarmé that here to Paris in particular. No? It's like when he goes and sees Louis Fuller dancing and then says that, what he sees is a poem that is not using any writing. So it's basically, it's putting us in a post-notational era. So it's like the body is able to communicate without any type of writing. So in that case, let's say that the dance is de-representing what actually is dance, right? So, big question for everyone. Is these new notations in a place that we didn't expect? So, of course, our representation is going to stay. We are going to play music with notes, and everything is going to stay the same because we need it. But it's also maybe a possibility that we go through this non-representational, let's say, path for creating new artworks or new developments. And how do we do it practically? This is the big question, no? So first I'm bringing, and maybe I can explore it later because I have, 1 minute mostly, that is the idea of performative materiality. That materiality is described with a lot of history. That is more or less what Sally also said. And these material conditions provide an inscriptional base for creating something performative that could be understood as a score. If we, for example, put a lot of things in a room and we perform some kind of arrangement, the whole thing has a different meaning. And that's what I think is this kind of laboratories of curiosities actually wanted, no? Another possibility that I'm bringing here is that, let's use these new approaches to the post-human philosophy that actually use of the concept of discursive practices to explain many of the things that we can do today. For example, gender. Gender is something that we don't represent. It's something that our body is not representing, but actually is our discursive, our performative actions what defines our gender. So we can do actually the same thing with music. So I'm now finishing right now is that the idea that if we work in the inactive world without any representation, of course, in this inactive field, we wouldn't have any representation at all. We would be really immersed in something that we can call media. So we can use, or we can understand computers just as media, not as tools, but a place, an environment, an ecological place where we are immersed and we just have to, let's say, grasp it, or suck it, or I know, modify it with our hands and extract what we want in an expressive way. Examples. For example, this choreographic object also by Forsyth. This bouncy castle that is quite famous. The tangible scores that I will present later. So it's a way of using touch without any kind of representation for creating a score. I'm gonna play 10 seconds and then I'm finishing. Okay. You will see later at 12 I'm playing. Okay. And they take different forms and shapes and arrangements and also materials. So conclusion, is representation something that we can escape a little bit for making our compositions? We know that that's possible actually because dancers, they don't need annotation for communicating, for creating choreographies. They can use it. There are choreographies for dance, but not so many people are using it. And of course, what we need is more work in this field of study for consolidating this idea in music. So, thanks.
Thank you, Enrique.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, next presenter. Ryan, do we have any questions? Do we have a question here? Ena first and then Pablo if we have that because you're...
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Really interesting. I'm just a quick question about when we can speak about notation, when we can speak about instruments, when we can speak about
Just some out here, you know,
and how this sort of
because this is
relate in this example.
Because I have to put the volume up and down.
So yeah, well, the definitions of course are quite blurry, but what I have been doing in the last years is understanding the performative materiality of a place as a score. So if it's an instrument, that's possible, but it's also that could be also just a piece of material that you find, or just being in some specific place that suggests you an interpretation. But that's something interesting that it needs the activation by someone who interprets and then wants to look for this. And this is what I think that defines that this is an artistic performance. That is not something only ecological, that you are perceiving that you are walking through some path and then something happens. This is why I think that we can define them as scores, because it's an definitive, performative, and something that you define by your own discourse.
Yeah, thanks so much.
It's very interesting and very close to my own interests as well. I'm wondering if we can actually live in a world without representation. It's a very hard problem. It's almost as hard as consciousness. There is lots of literature in embodied cognition. Anthony Cimero, radical embodied cognitive science, where he tries to show a way which is anti-representationalist. Do we need to get rid of those eventually? Why? I mean, the primacy of the body, the primacy of lived experience, that's true, but why should we go away anti-representationalist?
Well, I think that the postmodernism was really exaggerated in that thing. That they said that non-representationalism was the future or something like that. But of course, now we are more pragmatic. We all think that now that representation has survived since the beginning of postmodernism, and also that our daily life is representational, 100%. So we can do other inactive stuff, but mostly we need it. So all our books or our knowledge is based on these representation tools. So my approach, I thought it was going to be well understood, is that it's not anti, it's in parallel. I mean that many of the, what I see is that many of the possibilities of developing new approaches to music maybe can be inscribed in this non-representalism. But of course, we are all the day using representation for solving our issues of communication. That's the thing,
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Oh, was there?
Yes, it's just a comment. In the case of improvisation, we don't have pre-existing notation, only indication. And you were speaking about foresight, and it's words that are given to dancers, but they are professional dancers. We work on this basis. And in the case of your last presentation, I think it's like an installation because it is open to anybody and the pre-existing material is not a prescriptive notation. Then you can have various results. So when the mind observes the results, your question is, do you notate or not finally? I know that it's not your starting point, but finally, do you intend to have a trace of that?
Mm-hmm. For answering, I have to explain that there is a big difference, for example, between dancing and choreography. Dancing is something that we find ourselves dancing. So there's some music, and then you suddenly, you move with this music. So this is dancing. And it's not really your cognitive approach which puts you dancing only, okay? And then it comes the choreographer. The choreographer doesn't make dances because what he or she makes is staging a type of dancing. So he eventually decides that he's gonna put a person on a stage in the, dancing. So dances are not created by humans. You find yourself dancing. This is a little bit the approach that enactivism brings. That is, we many times find ourselves doing things without thinking of them, and our body makes them, and then finally we reflect on what is happening. So when foresight is putting this installation, showing this, is staging the possibility of a choreography. But he thinks that the interface or the inscription of this choreography is not really in the space, but it's in the body of each of us when you are dancing, okay? So the choreography, the composition is in your body. It's not on the space.
No, it's both. I'm publishing a thesis on foresight, and with all what he said about choreography and about enaction kinesphere. And kinesphere implies you have body and space.
Of course, I don't want to, make the conversation, but of course the space would be like an environment where he puts affordances and constraints, and of course he puts some of the choreography in there. But in my approach, in my opinion, that is personal, what he is doing is inscribing the choreography in ourselves and not in the space. But this is maybe my personal opinion about that, no?
Thanks, we will discuss later.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great to have this, yes. So, Ryan Ross-Smith, thank you very much, Enrique.